right? And it's funny because Lenin wrote about this. There's a very good pamphlet he wrote called Dare We Win. It's part of a larger pamphlet that he wrote, but it's Dare We Win. And he points out that that was ultimately why they didn't have a revolution in Germany. In Germany, in 19 at the end of World War I, 1918, the workers were in motion. There was revolt going on, but the German Social Democratic Party was so well embedded into the capitalist system that they weren't willing to risk a revolution because, the workers they'd overthrown the Kaiser. They were writing a new constitution. The government had fallen. The workers' councils were writing a new constitution, and the German Social Democrats insisted it was a capitalist constitution. And they killed Rosa Luxemburg and they killed Karl Liebknecht because they weren't going to allow, they were too afraid of the risk of revolution. They had built huge labor unions and huge choirs and huge Marxist institutes and all these. They had become such a machine under capitalism that the German Social Democratic Party was so big and so massive, and it had so much money and so much influence, that actually writing a socialist constitution and then risking what would have come afterwards, because the capitalists would have waged a civil war at that point. There would have been, Germany would have been invaded by, capitalist countries. Germany would have had to align with the Soviet Union. It was too much to risk. They didn't want to lose it all, right? And they were content with their socialist study groups and their legally recognized trade unions. And the German Revolution of 1918, it failed because the German Social Democratic Party was so big and so massive under capitalism. It had built such a big machine that it didn't want to risk it. And so when it came time, to write, they didn't want to risk it. And that was, Lenin talked about labor aristocracy, right? And that a lot of the upper layers of the labor bureaucracy, or the higher paid workers in the unions in Germany in 1918, they just didn't really want a revolution. They benefited, a lot of the higher paid craftsmen and all that benefited from German imperialism. They benefited from when Germany was an imperialist country, right? And they benefited from the exploitation of the Third World, and they didn't want to make a revolution in 1918. The majority of the workers in the German Social Democratic Party did, but the more influential ones that had more power, the labor bureaucrats, labor bosses, and they didn't want to make a revolution. And that's the problem, is that a lot of socialist groups, they become a group that carries out a function under capitalism, not a group that makes a revolution. And that's a problem. And that's the labor bureaucracy. The labor bureaucracy, right? It's great. It's there. It should be there. It represents workers on the job. It protects their rights and all of that. But ultimately, labor bureaucrats won't make a revolution. They're not going to make a revolution because they would risk everything. They would risk everything. Think about it. They would, if there's a revolution, they could potentially lose their $1 million jobs driving limousines and being the labor bosses. Think about it, right? And that's a problem. The labor bureaucracy, and when they're pushed on, when they're under attack, they'll be more radical, and sometimes they'll be more radical than others, but they're not a revolutionary force. It takes conscious communists, revolutionaries, socialists, Marxists to make a revolution. That the labor bureaucracy does what's in its material interest, right? And that's an important thing to remember. And that Germany in 1918 is an example of that. And there's many examples of that. That the labor bureaucracy, sometimes they're more revolutionary, other times they're not. But at the end of the day, they do what is in their material interest. And that it takes revolutionary Marxists with revolutionary ideology to make a revolution. And that, agree with me or disagree with me.